Tari Balogun had spent her entire life obeying her father's strict rules. As the only daughter of Chief Bode Balogun, a billionaire business tycoon, she had been raised to be prim, proper, and perfect. But on this one night at Lagos's most exclusive coastal resort, she allowed herself to be reckless. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and tropical drinks as she let loose for the first time in her life. One drink turned into two, then three, and before she knew it, she was in the arms of Jabari Adewale, the arrogant and spoiled son of the governor of Lagos State. The next morning, Terry woke up to a pounding headache and a bigger problem. Jabari was gone, leaving nothing behind but the fading scent of his designer perfume. As she tried to piece together the night, shame washed over her. What had she done? She had spent years avoiding the playboy, knowing his reputation for using women and tossing them aside. Now she had become one of them. But this was not just a mistake. It was a decision that would alter the course of her life forever. She spent the entire day in denial, hoping that what had happened was just a bad dream. But as reality settled in, Terry realized she had to keep moving forward. She buried herself in work, hoping to forget that night. But fate had other plans. Weeks later, Terry noticed the changes, the nausea, the fatigue, and the nagging feeling that something was off. A visit to a private doctor confirmed her worst fears. She was pregnant. The room spun as she clutched the results, her mind racing with the consequences. Her father would be furious, her mother would be devastated, and society would brand her a disgrace. When she finally gathered the courage to confess, the reaction was worse than she imagined. Chief Balogun's face turned red with fury as he slammed his fists on his mahogany desk. "You have shamed this family, Tari. I raised you better than this," he roared. Her mother, elegant as ever in a silk wrapper, merely sighed in disappointment, her silence cut. Tari was disowned. Her father made it clear that she was no longer welcome in the family mansion, and her credit cards were cut off. For the first time in her life, she had to fend for herself. With nowhere else to go, she found refuge in the guest house of her childhood nanny, Mama Ose. It was a far cry from the luxury she was used to, but Terry refused to be defeated. She took small jobs, learned the value of hard work, and slowly began to rebuild her life. At night, she cried herself to sleep, but by day, she worked tirelessly. She refused to let the judgment of society define her. With her determination and knowledge of business, she decided to create something of her own, a boutique hotel that would rival the best in Lagos. She poured her heart into it, using her eye for luxury and sophistication to craft an experience that drew in the elite. The once disgraced heiress was now a force to be reckoned with. But just as things began looking up, a hidden enemy from her past surfaced, threatening to destroy everything she had worked for. It started with anonymous threats, messages warning her to stay out of business she didn't belong in. Then one night, her hotel was vandalized, its grand entrance defaced with graffiti that called her a fraud. Someone wanted her to fail, and she had to find out who. Years passed, and Terry's hotel, the Royal Orchid, became the talk of Nigeria's high society. Investors clamored to be part of it, and celebrities made it their go-to destination. She had transformed from a fallen princess into a self-made queen. Her son Malik was her greatest joy, a bright, handsome boy with her eyes and, unfortunately, Jabari's smirk. She was no longer the weak girl who had once been cast aside. She was powerful, independent, and respected. People who once mocked her now sought her approval. The business world had crowned her a queen, and she wore her title with pride. Jabari had moved on, or so he thought. But when he saw Tari's face on the cover of a business magazine, something stirred inside him. The woman he had discarded was now more powerful and independent than ever. And she didn't need him. That realization burned more than he cared to admit. He told himself it was just curiosity, but deep down it was more. Regret, longing, a desire to undo the damage he had caused. But when he finally decided to make things right, he was met with a shocking revelation. Tari was no longer the vulnerable woman he once knew, and winning her back wouldn't be as easy as he assumed. Jabari thought his wealth and influence could win her over, but he was about to learn a hard lesson. Some things once lost can never be regained. And as Tari faced the biggest business challenge of her life, she would have to decide whether her past deserved a place in her future. And so the journey continues, with Tari's success, Jabari's growing regret, hidden enemies, and the battle between past wounds and unexpected love. Jabari Adewale had never been the type to dwell on his past mistakes. He had always believed that life was about moving forward, taking what you wanted and discarding what no longer served you. But lately, something about Tari's success gnawed at him. He had laughed at her when she told him about the pregnancy, confident that she would fall apart without his support. Instead, she had risen to heights he never expected. One evening, sitting in his father's opulent government mansion, Jabari scrolled through social media, his eyes catching a live interview with Tari. She sat elegantly in a red power suit, her hair in soft curls, exuding confidence as she spoke about the Royal Orchid's upcoming expansion into Abuja. The comments were flooded with admiration. She's such an inspiration. From scandal to success, Tari Balogun is a queen. Who needs a man when you have powers like this? Jabari clenched his jaw. That last comment stung. He had been raised to believe that men were the ultimate providers, that women needed them to thrive. And yet Tari had done it all without him. Worse still, their son bore his name, his blood, but he had never so much as looked in the boy's direction. The weight of his past choices settled heavily on him for the first time. His father, Governor Adewale, entered the room just as Jabari shut his phone in frustration. "Still wasting time on that girl?" the older man scoffed. "She's nothing, son. She was never worth your name." Jabari wanted to agree, but deep inside he knew it was a lie. Tari was not naive. She knew that success came with enemies, but as she walked through the grand lobby of her hotel, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. The threats had been increasing. Notes slipped under her office door, cryptic text messages, and strange men lurking near the premises. At first, she had brushed it off as the price of fame, but now she wasn't so sure. Mama Ose, who had become more of a mother to her than her biological one, noticed the tension. "My dear, you need to be careful," she said one evening as they sat on the hotel's rooftop lounge. "Not everyone is happy about your success." "I know," Tari admitted, swirling her wineglass, "but I refuse to live in fear." As the city lights twinkled below them, Malik ran toward his mother, his laughter filling the air. He had just turned 5, and he was the only thing that truly mattered. She had built this empire for him to prove that she was enough. But deep down, she knew she had to uncover the truth before it was too late. Her assistant, Nineka, rushed up to her, looking pale. "Tari, you need to see this." She handed over her phone. Tari's breath caught in her throat. A news headline flashed on the screen. "Governor's son caught in scandal, alleged secret child exposed." Jabari. Her past was about to collide with her present, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for the storm that was coming. Tari's heart pounded as she read the headline again. The news had spread like wildfire, dragging her past into the spotlight once more. She had worked tirelessly to bury her connection to Jabari Adewale, but the world had other plans. Neka shifted uneasily beside her. "It's already trending everywhere. People are speculating, digging up old photos. Some are even saying you intentionally hid Malik from Jabari." Tari inhaled deeply, forcing her emotions into check. "Let them talk. They always will." But the words stung. She had built her empire with dignity, shielding her son from the toxicity of Jabari's world. Now the very thing she had feared was happening: public scrutiny, media attacks, and whispers of whether she had deceived the governor's son. Later that night, Malik slept soundly in his bed while Tari sat by his side, watching his peaceful face. He was her world, her greatest love. She refused to let this storm shake their lives. But deep inside, she knew the real storm hadn't even begun. The next morning, her fears were confirmed when a call came from a familiar voice. "I think we need to talk." Jabari's voice was lower than she remembered, yet still held that arrogance she despised. Tari hesitated. We have nothing to discuss. You sure about that? Because I'm standing outside your hotel. She froze. He was here. Jabari had expected a cold reception, but nothing prepared him for the fire in Tari's eyes when she stepped outside the hotel's private entrance to meet him. Her figure was commanding, draped in a flowing emerald green dress that accentuated her success. Her arms were crossed, her gaze sharp. You have some nerve showing up here. Jabari smirked slightly, hands in his pockets. Figured it was time to see my son. Tari let out a bitter laugh. Oh, now you remember you have a son? I didn't know. You knew, Jabari. You just didn't care. Silence settled between them, the weight of unspoken regrets hanging in the air. He had always been good at dismissing problems, but standing in front of Tari, he saw something he hadn't before. Power, resilience, a woman who had built her world without him. I want to fix this, he finally admitted, but even as he said the words, he knew it wasn't that simple. Tari's face remained unreadable. You don't get to waltz in and fix things when it's convenient for you. She took a step closer, lowering her voice. Malik doesn't know who you are, and I won't let you hurt him the way you hurt me. Jabari clenched his fists. I made mistakes, but I won't be erased from his life. Tari studied him for a moment before sighing. We'll see about that. And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the shadow of her success, wondering if he had already lost the most precious thing he never knew he wanted. Tari paced in her office, her hands trembling as she clenched her phone. Jabari's sudden reappearance unsettled her more than she cared to admit. He was the same man who had discarded her like an afterthought, yet now he wanted to claim a role in Malik's life. She called Mama Oz, the only woman who had stood by her through it all. Within the hour, the older woman arrived, dressed in her usual flowing anchor gown, her expression laced with concern. You're shaking, Mama Osei observed, settling into the leather chair across from Tari's desk. Tell me what's wrong. Tari sighed. Jabari, he's back, and he wants to see Malik. Mama Osei's lips pressed into a thin line. That boy abandoned you, Tari. Do not let him waltz in and disrupt everything you built. I won't, Tari said firmly, but her voice wavered. But what if Malik asks about his father one day? What if I'm depriving him of something? Mama Osa reached across the desk, squeezing Tari's hand. That man didn't want to be a father when you needed him most. If he truly regrets it, let him prove himself, not just with words, but with actions. Tari nodded, the weight of responsibility settling heavier on her shoulders. She had spent years shielding her son from heartbreak, and she wouldn't let Jabari waltz in and break what she had so carefully protected. Jabari sat in his penthouse suite, his mind racing. He had thought Tari would crumble at his presence, but she had stood tall, reminding him that he was nothing but a stranger to her and their son. He wasn't used to being denied. He had always been in control of his wealth, his relationships, and his future. But Tari was different. She had changed, hardened by life, molded into a woman who no longer needed him. His father's voice echoed in his head. She was never worth your name. But was that true? Tari was no longer the naive young woman he had abandoned. She was powerful, untouchable in ways he hadn't imagined. And something about that drew him in like a moth to a flame. A knock at the door snapped him from his thoughts. His personal assistant, Collins, stepped in, his face tight with concern. Sir, there's a problem. Jabari frowned. What is it? Collins handed him a tablet, and when Jabari saw the contents, his blood ran cold. A secret blog had surfaced, exposing details of his past, his reckless parties, his multiple scandals, and worst of all, his rejection of Tari and their child. The title read, Governor's Son, the Man Who Walked Away from His Own Blood. Jabari gritted his teeth. This wasn't just bad press, it was a direct attack. Someone was determined to destroy his reputation, and he had a feeling Tari's rise had everything to do with it. If he wanted to fix things, he needed to act fast. But was he ready to confront the truth about the damage he had done? Tari knew something was wrong the moment she stepped into her office the next morning. The air was thick with unease, her employees whispering in hushed tones as she walked past. She had barely settled at her desk when Neka rushed in, eyes wide with panic. "You need to see this," Neka said, handing Tari her phone. Tari's stomach dropped as she read the latest headline. Heiress Tari Adewale and the governor's son, the untold story. Below it was a collage of photos, old pictures of her with Jabari from their university days, a grainy image of her walking out of a maternity clinic, and worst of all, a recent shot of Malik at the hotel's entrance. Her breath caught in her throat. "Who leaked this?" Neka hesitated. "That's not all." She scrolled down to the comments section. The speculations were brutal. Accusations that Tari had hidden Malik to secure financial leverage. Claims that she was an opportunist trying to tarnish the governor's family. Tari clenched her fists. "This is an attack. Someone is trying to discredit me." Neka nodded. "And I think I know who." Tari's eyes darkened. She didn't need to guess. Jabari's family had never accepted her, and this was exactly the kind of underhanded move they would make. Jabari was already waiting for her when she stormed into his penthouse, the city lights casting long shadows across the sleek furniture. He had expected her, but not the fury in her eyes. "What the hell did you do?" she demanded, throwing the tablet onto his glass table. Jabari glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening. "You think I did this? Who else?" she shot back. "Your father? Your family? This is exactly their style. Control the narrative, humiliate me, and protect your precious name." Jabari ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. "I had nothing to do with this," Tari scoffed. "Then fix it." He studied her for a moment, something shifting in his gaze. "Why does it bother you so much? You said you don't need me, that Malik doesn't need me, yet here you are." Tari's lips pressed into a thin line. "Because my son is being dragged into a war he didn't ask for, and because I built my life from the ashes you left behind. I won't let you or your family destroy it." Jabari stood, stepping closer. "And what if I want to be part of Malik's life now?" Tari let out a bitter laugh. "Too little, too late." She turned to leave, but before she could step out, Jabari's voice stopped her. "Tari, wait." For the first time, there was something genuine in his tone, something almost like regret. But Tari didn't look back. She had learned her lesson long ago. Tari barely made it back to her car before the weight of it all crashed down on her. She gripped the steering wheel, her breathing shallow. The press had found her son. The world now knew about Malik, and no matter how much she tried to shield him, he was now a pawn in a game she had never wanted to play. Her phone buzzed. Her mother. For a moment she considered ignoring it, but she knew she couldn't. "Mama," she said, her voice strained. "What have you done, Tari?" Her mother's voice was sharp with worry. "The whole country is talking about you. About Malik." "I didn't do anything," Tari said defensively. "Someone leaked those pictures." "I told you, keeping that child a secret would only lead to problems," her mother said, lowering her voice. "And now look, your father is furious. He says this is bringing shame to the family." Tari closed her eyes. "Of course he does. Jabari's father is already making calls. They want to control the narrative, Tari." Tari's grip tightened around the phone. She had spent years proving that she wasn't just the disgraced daughter of a CEO or a mistake Jabari had left behind. She had built something for herself. She wasn't about to let them strip it all away. "Let them try," she said coldly. "I'm not backing down." Jabari sat in his father's study, the air thick with cigar smoke. His father, Governor Adewale, sat across from him, eyes like steel. "You've embarrassed this family enough," his father said, setting a newspaper on the desk between them. The front page was stamped with a bold headline, "The Scandalous Child of the Governor's Son." Jabari exhaled slowly. "I didn't leak it." His father's lips curled in disdain. "That girl is a problem. She always has been. You should have never gotten involved with her." Jabari bristled. She's the mother of my child. And you denied that child for years, his father shot back. So why do you care now? Jabari's fists clenched at his sides. He had spent years running from his responsibilities, ignoring the consequences of his actions. But seeing Tari, hearing the strength in her voice, made him realize that she had risen from the ashes he had left her in. And that unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. You need to distance yourself from her, his father continued. I'll have this mess cleaned up. Jabari's jaw tightened. I don't need you to clean up anything. His father let out a cold chuckle. Then handle it yourself. But know this, if she drags this family down, you'll regret it. Jabari left the room, but his father's words echoed in his head. He had spent so long convincing himself that he didn't need Tari, that he didn't want her. But now, seeing her strength, her resilience, it only made him want her more. But was he already too late? Tari walked into her hotel the next morning, head held high, despite the whirlwind of gossip that swirled around her. Employees stole glances at her, some sympathetic, others curious. She had spent years building her empire, and now, thanks to the scandal, her name was being dragged through the mud. Tari, we have a problem, Nika said, intercepting her before she reached her office. Her assistant's face was tight with concern. What now? Tari sighed. Investors are pulling out, Nika revealed. They're worried about negative publicity, and some guests have started canceling their reservations. Tari felt a sharp pang in her chest, but masked it quickly. Fine, she said, her voice firm. We'll handle it. Double down on marketing, reach out to our loyal clientele. If they want to walk away, let them, but we'll stand. Nika nodded but hesitated. And Jabari's been trying to reach you. Tari scoffed. He's the last person I want to hear from. She pushed open the door to her office and froze. Jabari was already there, seated behind her desk like he belonged. Tari slammed the door behind her. You have some nerve, Jabari. He leaned back, an infuriating smirk playing on his lips. I figured this was the only way you'd see me. I have nothing to say to you, she snapped, crossing her arms. Jabari's expression turned serious. I'm here because I can help. Tari let out a humorless laugh. Help? You mean control? He stood, closing the distance between them. Listen to me, Tari. My father is pushing to make this worse for you. He wants to destroy your reputation. Make sure you and Malik never threaten our family's image again. Tari's stomach twisted, but she refused to show weakness. And you think I should be grateful that you're suddenly interested in fixing this? Jabari hesitated, and for the first time she saw something vulnerable in his gaze. I was wrong, Tari, about everything. I see that now. She shook her head. Too little, too late. He reached into his pocket and placed a file on her desk. Not if I can make this go away. Tari frowned and opened the folder. Inside were confidential documents, proof that his father had been funding illegal activities, things that could ruin him politically. Leverage, Jabari said simply. If my father doesn't back off, we expose this. Tari looked at him sharply. And what do you want in return? Jabari exhaled. A chance to be in Malik's life, to fix what I broke. Tari's heart pounded. This was dangerous. This was risky. But for the first time she wondered, was it worth it? Tari's fingers tightened around the folder as she processed Jabari's offer. The weight of the situation pressed against her chest. If she accepted his help, she was entangling herself in a power struggle that could bring down one of the most influential men in the country. If she refused, she risked being completely destroyed by the governor's ruthless tactics. She placed the folder on the desk and folded her arms. Why are you doing this, Jabari? What's in it for you? Jabari sighed and ran a hand through his hair. I don't expect you to believe me, but I regret everything. Pushing you away, denying Malik, letting my father dictate my life. I was a coward. This is my way of making things right. Tari studied his face, searching for deception. For years, Jabari had been nothing but an entitled, arrogant man who cared only about himself. But now, There was something different in his eyes. Determination, maybe even remorse. Still, she wasn't ready to trust him. "This could blow up in both our faces," she said cautiously. "I know," he admitted, "but I'm done running." Tari exhaled, conflicted. If she agreed, she'd have to rely on Jabari, something she swore she'd never do again. But for Malik's sake, for her business, and for her future, this might be the only way forward. The next morning, Tari and Jabari met at a discreet location, an upscale private lounge owned by one of her business associates. Away from prying eyes, they laid out their plan. "We have to be strategic," Jabari said, tapping the folder. "If we release everything at once, my father will find a way to spin it. We need to be calculated." Tari nodded. "We leak small pieces first, just enough to shake his confidence. Then, when he scrambles to cover it up, we hit him with the full story." Jabari smirked. "Smart. You always were." Tari ignored the compliment. "This isn't just about revenge, Jabari. I need to know you're serious about Malik. If you're just doing this to win points with me, you can walk away now." Jabari's expression hardened. "I don't blame you for doubting me. I deserve that. But I'm not here for show. I want to be in my son's life." Tari held his gaze for a moment, then finally relented. "Fine, let's take your father down." But as they shook hands, neither of them noticed the pair of eyes watching from a corner of the lounge, someone who had been sent to ensure that Jabari stayed in line. The governor already knew. The air inside the lounge felt heavier as Tari and Jabari parted ways, unaware that their every move was being watched. That night, Tari returned home to an ominous silence. Her mother had stopped calling, and her father still refused to acknowledge her existence. But tonight, there was something different in the air, a foreboding presence that sent a chill down her spine. Just as she was about to turn in for the night, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Hello?" A deep voice echoed through the receiver. "Miss Tari, you are playing a dangerous game." Her grip on the phone tightened. "Who is this?" "Let's just say I work for someone who doesn't appreciate disloyalty." Tari's heart pounded in her chest. "If this is a threat, it's a warning," the voice interrupted. "Walk away before it's too late. You're in over your head." The line went dead. Tari lowered the phone slowly, her mind racing. There was only one person powerful enough to send such a message. Governor Okoye knew everything, and he was coming for her. Tari didn't sleep that night. She knew she had to act fast, but she needed to talk to Jabari first. By morning, she was already en route to his private residence, a lavish estate guarded by armed security. She barely got through the gates before she was met with Jabari's personal assistant, who led her inside. Jabari was pacing when she entered. "I got the same call," he said, before she could even speak. His jaw was clenched, his face clouded with tension. Tari sat down, folding her arms. "We underestimated him." "I knew he would find out eventually," Jabari admitted, running a hand down his face. "But I didn't think he'd act this fast." A knock at the door interrupted them. His assistant stepped in. "Sir, you have a visitor. It's your father." Tari's breath hitched. Jabari straightened, his expression unreadable. "Let him in." Governor Okoye walked in, exuding power and menace. He glanced at Tari, his lips curling in disapproval before turning to his son. "Jabari, I believe it's time for a serious conversation." Jabari squared his shoulders. "If you're here to threaten me, save your breath." His father let out a low chuckle. "Threats? No, my son. I came with an offer. Walk away from this foolishness, return to the family fold, and I will ensure Tari's business flourishes. She'll be protected. Malik will want for nothing." Tari's stomach twisted. She knew there had to be a catch. Jabari narrowed his eyes. "And if I refuse?" The governor's smile faded. "Then you'll both lose everything." The room fell into a tense silence. Tari's pulse raced. This was the moment that would change everything. Jabari met Tari's gaze. "What do you want to do?" Tari swallowed hard. The answer was clear. She wasn't going to be bullied. We fight. Jabari's words hung in the air, a declaration of war against his father's empire. The governor's eyes darkened, his once amused smirk vanishing. He studied his son for a long moment before shifting his gaze to Tari. "You're making a grave mistake," Governor Okoye said in a low, measured tone. "You think you can fight me and win?" Tari clenched her fists, her voice unwavering. "We don't need to win against you. We just need to survive you." The governor let out a slow exhale and adjusted his cufflinks. "Brave words, but bravery won't save you when everything you hold dear crumbles before you." He turned on his heel and walked toward the door, his polished shoes echoing through the room. Just before he exited, he looked back at Jabari. "You were my greatest disappointment, but I always thought you had some sense. You are choosing ruin, son. And for what? A woman and a child?" Jabari's expression hardened. "A woman who is stronger than you'll ever be. A child who will never have to grow up under your shadow." Governor Okoye's lips pressed into a thin line before he left the room. The air felt heavy with finality. Tari turned to Jabari. "We just declared war on the most powerful man in the country. What's next?" Jabari inhaled deeply, determination settling in his bones. "We prepare." By the next morning, news was already swirling about Jabari's break from his father. The media had caught wind of the growing rift between them, and headlines speculated on what it meant for Okoye's political future. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Jabari and Tari were working tirelessly to secure allies who could protect them from the governor's wrath. Tari met with influential business owners, securing partnerships that would ensure her hotel empire continued to thrive despite the looming threats. Jabari, on the other hand, reached out to political insiders, people who had once been allies of his father, but had since grown tired of his iron-fisted rule. One such person was Chief Olumide, a seasoned politician and former associate of the governor. When Jabari and Tari arrived at his mansion, the older man welcomed them with cautious curiosity. "I never thought I'd see the day when you'd go against your father, Jabari," Chief Olumide mused, sipping from a glass of whiskey. "He's not a man to be crossed lightly." Jabari nodded. "I know, but I also know he's made plenty of enemies. We need allies who want to see him lose." The chief chuckled. "You're not wrong about that. Your father has stepped on many toes. But aligning with you means going to war with him. Why should I risk that?" Tari leaned forward, her voice steady. "Because the governor's power is not as untouchable as people think. We have leverage, proof of his illegal dealings. And when the time comes, we will bring him down." Chief Olumide studied them for a long moment before a slow smile spread across his face. "Now that interests me." As he extended his hand, Tari and Jabari knew they had just secured their first real ally. The battle had officially begun. The night after their meeting with Chief Olumide, Tari and Jabari sat in the dimly lit study of their hotel suite, plotting their next move. If they were going to take down Governor Okoye, they needed to strike first, and they needed to be smart about it. "We can't just wait for him to attack," Jabari said, his jaw clenched. "We have to go on the offensive." Tari nodded, spreading documents across the table. "We have proof of his offshore accounts and bribery scandals. If we leak this strategically, we can cause a media frenzy." Jabari ran a hand through his hair. "It's risky. If he figures out it's coming from us, he'll retaliate harder." "Let him," Tari said firmly. "I'm not afraid of him anymore." Jabari studied her for a moment, admiration flickering in his gaze. "All right," he said. "Then let's hit him where it hurts the most. His reputation." The next morning, a bombshell report hit the news. An anonymous source had leaked damning evidence of Governor Okoye's illicit financial dealings. The country was in an uproar. The once revered governor was now under scrutiny, with reporters hounding his every move. By noon, his political rivals were already calling for an investigation. Tari and Jabari watched the chaos unfold from their suite, knowing this was only the beginning. Governor Okoye sat in his office, the weight of the scandal pressing heavily on his shoulders. For the first time in his career, he felt powerless. He had always controlled the narrative, but now his past was catching up with him. His son had turned against him, and no amount of power or wealth could erase the shame he felt. As he scrolled through the news, one image caught his eye, a photograph of Tari holding her child, standing tall despite everything. Her strength was undeniable. He had tried to crush her, but she had only risen higher. And his son? Jabari had never looked prouder or more determined. Governor Okoye exhaled deeply, rubbing his temple. Perhaps he had been wrong. Perhaps his fight against Tari wasn't just about power. It was about his own fear. He had always believed love was a weakness, but maybe, just maybe, it was the very thing that made people strong. The next morning, to everyone's shock, Governor Okoye called for a press conference. The world watched as the powerful man, who had always been known for his ruthless demeanor, stood before the cameras with an expression of regret. "I have made mistakes," he began. "In my quest for control, I have hurt those I should have protected. Today I ask for forgiveness, not just from the public, but from my own son and the mother of my grandchild." The world was stunned, but no one more than Jabari and Tari, who watched from their hotel room in silence. That evening, Governor Okoye visited Jabari and Tari personally. For the first time in years, he looked his son in the eye without judgment, only remorse. "I was wrong," he admitted. "I let my pride and ambition blind me. Tari, I have done you an unforgivable wrong, and yet you never bowed to me. You proved stronger than I ever anticipated, and for that, I respect you." Tari studied him carefully, searching for deception, but all she saw was sincerity. She nodded slowly. "I never wanted a war with you. I just wanted to be left alone to raise my child in peace." Governor Okoye sighed. "I understand that now, and I will make things right." After a moment of silence, Jabari cleared his throat and turned to Tari. His heart pounded as he stepped closer. "I also need to say something." She looked at him, waiting. "I failed you," Jabari said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was a coward when you needed me most. I let my arrogance, my fears, and my father's influence dictate my actions. But no more. I want to be the man you and our child deserve." Tears welled in Tari's eyes, but she didn't look away. "I love you, Tari," Jabari said earnestly. "I always have, even when I was too blind to see it. I promise from this day forward to love you right, to be there for you and our child, no matter what." Tari swallowed hard, overwhelmed by his words. She had fought so hard to be strong on her own, but now, for the first time, she felt like she didn't have to fight alone. "Then prove it," she whispered. "Not just with words, but with actions." Jabari smiled, his eyes filled with determination. "I will." As the night fell, a new chapter in their lives began. Not built on pain and regret, but on love, forgiveness, and the promise of a future they would build together. For the first time in a long time, Tari felt at peace, knowing that she had finally won, not just against Governor Okoye, but against the doubts that had once plagued her heart. And as Jabari took her hand in his, she knew this was just the beginning of something beautiful.